Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mind Solution podcast. My name's Sarah Maud and I'm here today to share with you some insights about mental health stigma and why it is that in the 21st century, 2021, we still have so much stigma attached to mental health, and what it is that you as leaders and organisations can do to help to transform that, to help to change how we view and perceive mental health. Now, looking at mental health and the stigma around mental health is something which we do with our management mental health training. And it's always really interesting to hear the views of managers around the world in different industry share their experiences of mental health and why, from both social and cultural vantage points, we still have this stigma around mental health. And why it is that, we are in 2021, we're working our way, slowly but surely, we're working our way through this global pandemic, which has affected pretty much most of us globally in different ways, shapes and forms. And, we're not robots. We are designed as humans to experience emotion. That's what makes us human. And it's normal that our emotions are going to fluctuate on a daily basis. And sometimes when our emotions fluctuate too much and we get stuck in the stress response, for example, for too long, then of course our mental health is going to be compromised. Of course we're not going to be able to access the executive functions of the brain, for example, that we're going to struggle to regulate our emotional responses, and that spills out into our physical health. So understanding that this is a very normal and a natural thing, why there is still this big tumultuous label when it comes to mental health. Well, if we were to just take a big step back and think about actually where it is that we've come from. And one insight that a manager on our training recently shared with us was how he'd struggled with depression for over 30 years. And for over 30 years, not even his wife knew that he had depression. He'd kept it bottled up for so long. And he worked in the kind of industries which, like banking, Wall Street, it didn't feel safe for him to say what he was going through, what he was experiencing. He described those industries where those types of jobs that you face continuous rejection in. And those very masculine environments where there's a lot of competition. And again, saying that you've got depression is like putting your head purposefully above the parapet to be shot. And he was so terrified of being judged, of being perceived to be weak, to be less than, that fear kept him in that holding place for such a long time. Until he reached the point, and it took him 30 odd years to get there, but he reached the point where he said, I can't do this anymore. Enough is enough. But what was beautiful about his story is that when he reached that point and thought, I've got nothing to lose anymore by saying, this is what I'm going through, that actually he didn't find judgment. He didn't find discrimination. He found compassion. He found empathy. He found understanding. And it was almost as if he'd been carrying this huge boulder around for 30 years that finally he could put it down. He could breathe a sigh of relief, and he could start to change the inner landscape, what was going on for him internally, to get him to a much happier place, a much better place, to free himself from what I guess you could describe as this inner prison in his mind. But again, if we kind of go back to how things used to be, I mean, I've just got off a training course, again, management mental health training today, and one of the managers was talking about how, I don't know where it was, but she was describing how managers, it was acceptable for them to throw objects at other people. Thankfully, I can't say I ever witnessed that myself, working in human resources for 10 years in the corporate world. Might have felt like throwing some objects myself at the time, but yeah, never on the receiving end of any objects or vases or things. But again, it's how we, these environments, these cultures that were created. And I mean, one of the cultures that I often think about when we think about mental health is the banking industry. If we think about Goldman Sachs, for example, who came under huge scrutiny in 2015 when an analyst, a young guy who's only 22, took his own life and had just been working flat out 80, 100 hours a week. But there was also very much an unspoken expectation that if you want to work here, if you want to be at the best, if you want to raise your profile, if you want the promotion, if you want the salary, this is what's expected of you. That you are expected to pick up calls at a weekend, you're expected to answer emails late at night, you're expected to perform in this way, in a way that is not sustainable. And ironically, it's not high performance. Working 80 to 100 hours a week is the opposite of high performance if you really understand the neuroscience behind what's needed to perform well consistently, to really thrive internally. And another manager had shared that what she remembers is that when people had a mental health condition, you were told to just get over it. Now, if you've ever experienced mental health, with the best will in the world, you can't just get over something. If you are, take something like anxiety, anxiety which is very fear-based, it's usually trauma-based. If you've had an experience which hasn't processed in your mind and it's influencing the way that you think and you behave and the way that you feel, you can't just get over that. But that's again very much the message that was given. And certain generations who, maybe the more older generation, I'm actually not sure what generation I am. I don't know if I'm X or Y. I'm in my 40s, so I'm definitely not a millennial and I'm certainly not a snowflake, but I'm somewhere in the generation. And actually, what messages did we receive, especially what messages did you receive as a man about what it meant to be a man? Man up, that you don't show emotion, that emotion is a weakness. And I've worked with so many men who again have experienced those messages that have conditioned them, often at an unconscious level, not necessarily consciously, but they've taken that on. And so when they have struggled with their mental health, it's often taken them quite a long time to finally get help. because they've usually taken the ostrich approach to problem solving and just buried their head in the sand and hoped that it would go away. But again, as we know with mental health, it doesn't go away, it just gets worse. Little belly aches, they become big belly aches very quickly. And they reach a point where they know that they can't carry on. And then when they finally do take that step, and it is a courageous, brave step to reach out, it's like they can breathe this huge sigh of relief. Because when they start to understand the mind and the body, and they're able, with working like with a therapist, somebody like me or another therapist, to understand what's really happening at a physiological level and at a neurological level in a way that makes sense. It's like, oh, okay, so that's why I'm feeling anxious. All right, okay, I get it now. It's based on this experience that I had where something happened, whatever that was, and it's just not being processed. And so when we start to process that and we start to neutralize the fears and the beliefs, it just creates a shift in the way that people think and they feel and they act. And it's like, oh my goodness, why did I not do this sooner? But again, they didn't do something sooner because of how they were internalizing it, what they were making it mean. And often when we are experiencing mental health, it's a very scary thing to did a grenade and they just didn't know what to do. But again, when they understand more about the mind and the body, and they understand what's happening to them and why it's happening to them, it's like, oh, okay. And then they can let that label go. And when we think about fear, this fear of having this label, fear is such a driver in human life. In fact, we're probably driven more by fear than we are anything else, because we are primed to survive. Above anything else, that is our basic instinct, is survival. So if we have something that is potentially compromising our survival, and how do we deal with that? So if we take again this topic of mental health and stigma, the fear around this subject, the fear of being treated differently, the fear of being discriminated against, the fear of what will happen if I say that I'm not okay, the fear I might lose my job, the fear that I won't get the promotion, the fear that I'm not going to get put on the good projects, the fear of rejection. And that fear can absolutely act as a concrete barrier to us putting ourselves in a place of vulnerability and saying, I'm not okay. And some of the managers on our course were talking about these different movements, the Me Too movement and the movement around it's okay not to be okay. And also talking about how we've had more public figures step forward and share their stories very honestly, very candidly about their own experience and their own battle with mental health, which has helped at some level to normalize mental health. I mean, hey, we've even had our royal family in the UK talk about mental health. But we're still not where we need to be, because we have got all of these inherent fears in us, and the fear of being stigmatized, the fear that we are going to be judged. So what's the solution? What can we do as organisations to make mental health understood, to make it accepted, to transform how we see and how we judge and how we view this term? Because it is just a label. It is a label, but as I say, it's a big, scary label. And I think from my perspective, having worked in this field for 10 years, having worked with thousands of people, worked with many, many, many organisations, a big part of this comes from education. Educating people about the mind and the body, helping them to understand, why do we think and feel and act and behave the way that we do? Why do we limit ourselves in our thinking and our beliefs about ourselves? Why do we reject ourselves? Why do we react to situations the way that we do? So when people are able to really start to understand their own inner landscape, their own mechanism of what makes them do what they do, behave how they behave, it becomes, they move into a place where it's like, okay, I understand why. I understand the why of why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling at times. So education is a big, big part, and continuous education. You know, it's not enough to just run one webinar on mental health awareness and expect everybody to suddenly understand mental health and the mind and the body. Apart from anything, we do need to hear something more than once, but it's a big topic and it's a lot to take in. So we need to be consistent in the way that we educate people. And I think on the other side of that is also looking at our organisational cultures. You know, we often hear this term of top down. So what are those unspoken agreements? What are those unspoken expectations about what you expect from your people? You know, you might have an organisation who says, yeah, you know, we do this, this and this around mental health, but are they walking the talk? Are they practicing what they preach? What are managers communicating both consciously and unconsciously about their expectations? Because we want people to thrive, don't we? We want people to be at their best. We want people to be happy and engaged and enjoying their work. We're wanting people to be creative, be innovative, be solution orientated, to be performing, to be firing on all 4 cylinders, to be engaged mentally, physically, emotionally. But when we are living in the stress response, when we're living in survival mode, when we're so entangled in something in our mind that creates so much fear, then we're not able to be the best favourite version of ourselves. And so as organisational leaders, it's understanding, what does it take to create a high-performing team? And what can you do to equip your people with the skills and the knowledge and the resources to help them, to help themselves? That prevention over cure. So education and looking at your culture. And something which I have seen, which I've loved seeing, is a lot of organisational leaders themselves speaking out about their own experiences of mental health, their own experiences of what they've been through, what they learnt from it, and how, you know, how they dealt with it and how it made them a stronger person at the end of the day. Because the more that we're willing to be vulnerable, the more that we're willing to be authentic about ourselves, then the more that we're going to create the kind of culture that breeds that. So we have to be the change that we want to see. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought, some insights. Would love to hear from you. If you need any support with management mental health training and equipping your people, then do get in touch with us. www.themindsolution.com. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.